What's up, everybody? We'll be getting started here in the next couple of minutes. We will be live streaming the House Call Pro Jocko Willink Spring Summit. It's going to be a little bit boring right now. If you're rewatching the live stream, I've got the desktop muted because we are just wrapping up the last session. Okay. What was up? We are live.
I realized that the reason that this
Oh
platoon
man,
is
I forgot
falling
to
apart is
unmute.
because
Oh,
the
I'm so
leaders
sorry.
didn't know how to lead.
I'm so sorry.
And I also realized that I'm the one that's supposed to be teaching the leaders how to lead. And so I'm the one that's failing. So got done with that training mission, and I went back to my barracks, and I went and I recognized that what I needed to do was I needed to take all the lessons I had learned throughout my career, all the lessons I had been taught throughout my career, all the lessons that we had solidified during the Battle of Ramadi, and I needed to distill them down into something that these young SEAL leaders could easily understand and then implement into their platoons. And I ended up writing down what we now call the 4 laws of combat leadership: cover and move, simple, prioritize and execute, and decentralized command. And I want to talk through these a little bit. So the first one is cover and move. And what cover and move is, cover and move, it's a gunfighting tactic. That's what it is. It's when you get in a fight with machine guns, you got to use cover and move to win. And the way it works with cover and move is, if I'm out on a mission with one of my buddies, and there's a building across the street and there's bad guys in that building, and we want to take out those bad guys and take down that building, we have to use cover and move to do that. And what that means is, there's bad guys in that building across the street, I'll start shooting at those bad guys. And as I'm shooting at those bad guys, what are the bad guys doing? Well, they're ducking their head, they're hiding so they don't get shot. And while the bad guys are hiding, my buddy, he gets up and he moves to a better position. Once he's in a better position, he starts shooting at the bad guys. Now, while the bad guys are ducking because my buddy is shooting at them, he's putting down, that's called cover fire. While he's putting down that cover fire, I move to a better position. Once I'm in a better position, I start shooting again. While I'm shooting and I got the cover fire going, my buddy moves to an even better position. And that's what we do. We work together as a team until we get close enough to that building to take out those bad guys and take down the building. That's cover and move. And it's a very simple tactic. Now, what if I'm sitting here shooting at the bad guys and my buddy is up and moving, and all of a sudden I decide, you know what, I'm a little bit thirsty, I'm going to put my weapon down, I'm going to get a drink of water, right? What happens then? Well, then the bad guys, they stick their head up, they see my buddy moving, and they shoot him because they're bad guys. And I might be sitting over here going, oh, that's too bad for him. You know, he just got shot. That's terrible for him. But it's not just terrible for him. It's actually horrible for me because I just lost my cover guy. And now the enemy is going to cover and move on me, and they're going to take me out. So it's very important to remember that when one part of the team fails, it's not just that part of the team that fails. It is the whole team that fails. So if we have one part of our team that's not doing their job, it's not just that part of the team that fails. It's everyone will fail because we all rely on each other. All have to support each other. Now, in order to provide cover and move for each other, what we have to do inside of our organization is we have to build relationships with each other. That's what we have to do. We have to build relationships with each other, because if I've got someone that I work with, if I work with Fred over here, and I don't know anything about Fred, and I don't trust Fred, or I don't listen to Fred, or I don't respect Fred, is Fred going to listen to me? Is he going to trust me? Is he going to respect me? Of course not. So I have to build a relationship. And to me, that's what a relationship is. I've got 5 components for a relationship: trust, listen, respect, influence, and care. And that's how I build a relationship. And the way that you develop those components inside of a relationship is you have to give them. If you want someone to trust you, you have to put some trust in them. If you want someone to listen to you, you have to listen to them. If you want someone to treat you with respect, you got to treat them with respect. If you want to have influence over someone else, you've got to allow them to influence you. And lastly, if you want someone to care about you, you've got to show that you care about them. So if you give those things to other people, trust, listen, respect, influence, and care, if you give them to them, they will give them back to you. So we have to develop those relationships. And also, I know in any business, but especially the type of business that you all are in, retaining people can be a problem. It can be hard to hang on to somebody. And this is another component where building good relationships will help you retain people, because when you take care of other people and have a good relationship with them, they will take care of you and they will stay with you longer. So that is the first law of combat leadership. We have to build relationships so we can cover and move and support each other. Now, the second law of combat leadership is keeping things simple. We have to keep things simple. And I used to get these, young SEAL officers that went to some Ivy League college and they had big giant heads with big giant brains in them. And they thought they were very, very smart. And I'd give them some training mission. I'd say, all right, here's a target here. Why don't you go out and plan a mission on how you would assault that target? And these guys would disappear for 4 or 5 or 6 hours. And they'd come back to me to present their plan to me. And they'd come walking in with their big giant heads. And they would present their plan to me. And their plan would be the most convoluted, complex thing that I could even imagine. Just totally ridiculous. And of course, they had a look on their face like they had the most brilliant plan in the world. And I'd look at their plan and I'd say, your plan is dumb. And they'd get this dejected look on their face. And I'd say, listen, here's what's going on. The best plan, the most brilliant plan, is the plan that is so simple and so clear that every person on the team actually understands what the plan is. That's a brilliant plan. And then I would also have to remind them that when you come up with a simple plan, you then have to communicate that plan in a simple, clear, concise manner that everyone on the team actually understands. Because if you don't come up with a simple plan and you don't communicate that plan in a way that the team can understand it, there is no possible way that they can execute the plan. So we have to keep things simple. And that is the second law of combat leadership. Now, the third law of combat leadership is prioritize and execute. And what this means is you are going to have problems. You're going to have problems on the battlefield. You're going to have problems in business. You're going to have problems in life. And what makes problems difficult to handle is that most of the time, because of Murphy's Law, problems come at us all at the same time, right? You don't get one problem on Monday afternoon, the next problem comes on Wednesday, and the next problem comes Friday morning. You don't get problems like that. No, it's Monday morning. Here's all the problems. They all hit you at the same time, and it's the same thing in combat. And it was very difficult for young SEAL leaders to process through that, all these different problems, and handle them properly. And when I ran that advanced SEAL training, I would give them multiple problems at the same time in order to see how they'd react. I'd give them, I'd shoot at them with paintball. So they're in a firefight. I'd give them a wounded guy. So they'd have to try and figure out what to do with the wounded guy. I'd give them civilians to deal with. And then I'd give them their forces all split up in a different location. So they didn't even know where all their people were. And I would watch to see how they would try and handle all those problems. And what I saw was I'd see a young SEAL leader. First, he'd run to the wounded guy and try and start taking care of the wounded guy. Then he'd run to the civilians and try and figure out what to do with the civilians. Then he'd try and figure out where they're all getting shot at from. Then he'd try and figure out where all his people are. And then he'd go back to the wounded guy and then back to the firefight and then back to the civilians. And then he would try and solve all of his problems at the same time. And when he would try and solve all of his problems at the same time, he wouldn't solve any of them. And so I'd pull the leader aside and I'd say, listen, when you have all these problems, what you have to do is you have to prioritize and execute. You've got to figure out what your biggest problem is and then focus on that biggest problem until you get that problem solved or you get it moving in the right direction. Then you can move on to the next biggest problem. Once you get the next biggest problem solved, you can move on to the next one and so on down the line. And of course, the young SEAL leaders would look at me and say, yes, sir. And then I'd send them out on another training mission. And I'd give them that same group of problems. Wounded guy, firefight, civilians to deal with, not knowing where all their people were. And I would watch to see what they would almost always make their number one priority. And 9 times out of 10, what they would focus on would be the wounded guy. That would be their number one priority. And so they'd be walking down the street, all of a sudden paintball starts flying everywhere. They see one of their guys fall down, they run over to their guy to help him out. And then what happens to the leader? The leader gets shot too. The leader gets shot too because the biggest problem isn't the wounded guy. The biggest problem is the people with machine guns trying to kill us. And I tried to figure out why these young SEAL leaders kept making this obvious mistake. And after a while, I figured out what the problem is. And I figured out that there was something else I needed to teach them. I needed to teach them to detach, to take a step back from the chaos, take a step back from the mayhem, take a step back from the emotions, and detach from all those feelings so that they could logically see what the most important thing was and what the highest priority was. Now, another thing I think it's important to mention here is I also saw throughout my career people that would prioritize things that they had no control over. So they would waste time thinking about things that they had no control over. There are some things in combat, there are some things in business, there are some things in life that we can't control. They are just completely beyond our control. And if that's what you focus on, you're falling behind. So don't prioritize things that you can't control. Focus on the things that you can control and then prioritize those things in what is the most important of the things you can control. And that is the third law of combat leadership, which is prioritize and execute. Detach, take a step back, focus on what you can control, and prioritize and execute. Now, this brings us to the fourth law of combat leadership, which is decentralized command. And decentralized command is very important, very important. And it's an interesting concept because I used to hear it a lot when I was in the military, and I heard it a lot once I started working with civilian companies. And I know it sounds complicated, but decentralized command is actually not that complicated of an idea. What decentralized command means is simply everybody leads. Everybody leads. And that's what I want when I'm in a leadership position. I want everyone on my team to be a leader, to step up and lead. And I used to tell this to these young SEAL officers. I'd say, hey, listen, you know that training problem that I sent you out on last night that was chaos and mayhem and you failed? You remember that? And they'd say, yeah. And I'd say, it's going to be even worse tonight. It's going to be more mayhem. It's going to be more chaos, and you're not going to be able to handle it on your own. What you need to do is you need to use decentralized command. You need to let your subordinate leaders lead. And the young SEAL leader would look at me and say, okay. And then I'd send them out on the battlefield. Again, these are training missions. I'd send them out on a training mission, and I would start to put that chaos on them. And as I start to put that chaos on them, I'd see those subordinate leaders, they'd start to step up and they'd start to lead. And for a moment, there would be hope in my heart that this was going to go well. But then I'd see those subordinate leaders, as they started to lead, they'd start to run into each other. They'd start to make opposing calls. Sometimes they would even shoot each other with paintball. And it'd be total chaos and total mayhem and total failure. And I would bring the platoon back to base, and I would bring them into the debriefing room, and I'd bring the leader of the platoon up to the front of the room, and I'd say, okay, that was pathetic. What happened? And the young SEAL leader would, he'd say, well, I tried using that decentralized command stuff, but it just doesn't work. And then I would have to detach from my emotions a little bit. I'd say, no, actually, decentralized command works great. It's just that you're terrible at it. And then, of course, I'd realize that I'm the one that's supposed to be teaching them decentralized command. So I'm the one that's terrible. And so then I'd say, listen, with decentralized command, you still have to lead. And the way that you lead with decentralized command is by making sure that everyone on the team understands what the mission is. understands what the goal is, understands what their job is, understands how their job fits into the big picture, understands the parameters that they're allowed to work within. And the most important thing they need to understand is why they're doing what they're doing. That's the most important thing that they need to understand, is why they're doing what they're doing. And so let me give an example of what this would look like. So I'm going to go out on a mission, and I got my buddy Fred, and I say, okay, Fred, here's what's happening. We're going on this mission tonight. We're going to assault this building. And once we assault the building and we get the building secured, I want you to take your team and go up to the rooftop and set security. And Fred looks at me and says, cool, got it. And so that's what we do. We go out on this mission. We assault this building. Once we get this building secured, Fred knows now it's his time to take his team up to the rooftop. And he takes his team up to the rooftop to set security. And when he gets up there, we're over in Iraq. And in Iraq, it doesn't rain very much, so there's flat roofs most of the time. And the way they do their construction over there, they put a little parapet wall around the roof. A little parapet, maybe 3 or 4 foot wall around the roof, and makes it being on the roof a very good place to be. Because when you're up in an elevated position, you can see a lot, but there's a wall there, so the enemy can't really see you. And if they do see you, they can't shoot at you because there's a wall in the way. So it makes being on the roof a tactically advantageous position. Well, Fred gets up to this particular rooftop, and instead of being there a wall there's no wall. There's no wall. So what does that mean? That means he and his team are completely exposed to the enemy. And that's not a good feeling. And his team doesn't like that feeling at all. So they're looking over at Fred like, what's happening here? This is ridiculous. And finally, one of the Fred's team guys says, hey, Fred, what are we even doing up here? This is stupid. And Fred, not wanting to be the stupid one, he looks at his team and says, well, we're just up here because Jocko said to be up here. This is a terrible situation. Now, not only is the team exposed to the enemy, not only can the enemy see the team and shoot the team actually also thinks their entire chain of command is stupid. So how do we solve this? Well, the way that we solve this is, let me rewind. Let me go back to our planning, and I'm giving a brief, and I say, okay, Fred, here's what's going on. We're going to assault this building tonight. Once we get the building secured, I want you to take your team up to the rooftop to set security. And Fred says, cool, got it. And then I say, the reason why I want you to do that is I want you to make sure that no enemy approaches on this road up here to the north. That's where we think the enemy is. We've got satellite imagery of enemy up the road to the north, and I want you to make sure that no enemy comes down that road. That's why I'm putting you on the rooftop. And Fred says, cool, got it. Now, we do the same thing. We go assault the target. We take down the target building. Once we get the building secured, Fred takes his team up to the rooftop. Once he gets to the rooftop, he looks around and he's expecting there to be a wall there, but there's no wall, and his team is totally exposed. And he doesn't like it. And his team doesn't like it. And he assesses the situation. He says, hey, team, come with me. And he goes back inside the building, goes down to the 3rd floor, goes into a north-facing room, opens up the windows, puts his machine gunners in place, and he calls me up on the radio and he says, hey, Jocko, it's Fred. There was no wall around the roof. My team was exposed. We went down to the 3rd floor. I'm in a north-facing room, and I've got that road to the north covered. And you know what I say? I say, thank you. I say, thank you, Fred, because Fred was able to solve the problem. And the reason that Fred was able to solve the problem is because his team knew not just what to do, but why they were doing it. So it is important for us as leaders to explain not just what to do, but why to do it. And listen, if Fred doesn't know why he's doing what he's doing, he should raise his hand and say, hey, boss, why are we doing this? And I know that there's some people I know that there's some people listening to me right now. They don't like when someone on their team says, "Hey boss, why are we doing this?" You know what their answer is when that question gets asked? "Cuz I said so." Bad answer. When someone on my team asks why we're doing something, I am overjoyed. I am overjoyed because I know that they're going to be able to go out into the field and make decisions and lead. So that's what we have to do. We have to make sure that everyone on our team understands not just what to do, but why they're doing it so they can go out there and lead with decentralized command. And that is the fourth law of combat leadership. Everybody leads. Now, beyond those laws, I want to talk about just a couple more things. The first thing I want to talk about is an idea that seems very counterintuitive, meaning a lot of people, when they hear it, it doesn't make sense. And the idea is discipline equals freedom, right? You got freedom on the one side, which is we get to do whatever we want. We got discipline, which is like a rigid, structured way of doing things. And of course, between discipline and freedom, what does everybody want? Everybody wants freedom. Everybody wants freedom. I mean, even as individuals, we want freedom, right? We want financial freedom. But here's what's interesting about these two opposing things. Everybody wants financial freedom, but in order to get financial freedom, you got to have financial discipline. You got to have the discipline to work hard. You got to have the discipline to save your money. You got to have the discipline to invest your money properly. You got to have the discipline not to buy stupid things that you don't even need. And if you have that kind of financial discipline as an individual, you'll end up with financial freedom. And it's the same thing with free time. Same thing with free time. Everybody wants more free time. How do you get more free time? More disciplined time management. You got to wake up early. You got to make a schedule for yourself. You got to stick to your schedule. You got to stop doing things that waste your time. And if you have more disciplined time management, you'll end up with more free time. So discipline as an individual person will give you freedom. But it's not only true with us as individuals, it is true with teams as well. And if you saw my SEAL platoon, you would have seen that we had a disciplined standard operating procedure for just about everything we did. Just about everything we did, we had a system of doing it. We created systems. So the way we lined up our vehicles, the way we checked our vehicles and prepped them for an operation, the way we loaded our vehicles, the way we drove to a target, the way we entered a target building, the way we cleared a target building, the way we loaded the vehicles back up, just about everything that we did, we had a disciplined standard operating procedure for. And you might think that that would constrain us out on the battlefield. But it didn't constrain us at all. In fact, because we had discipline, because we had systems in place, it gave us freedom. Because if I needed someone to go take down a building we hadn't planned to take down, I could just say, Fred, go hit that building over there. And Fred could just go hit that building. He didn't need to tell me who he was going to take with him, what weapons they were going to use, what methodology they were going to utilize to clear that building, what tactics they were going to use. He didn't need to tell me any of that. And he didn't need to tell his team either, because we all already knew. We had systems in place on how to operate. So it saved us time, it made us more efficient, and it gave us freedom. So don't waste time doing things that systems can do for you. Put those systems in place. Have discipline inside your organization. Now, can you have too much discipline inside of an organization? Actually, yes, you can. And I work with some companies and I work with some military units where they had so much structure in place that people couldn't move anymore. And when people can't move, they stop thinking. And when they stop thinking, now we have problems inside of our organization. So you have to have enough discipline and systems in place that they can make things happen, that they understand what to do and how to do it, but you still need to give them enough freedom that they can adapt when they need to. Now, another thing, and this is an interesting thing for me to have to talk about. And what's really interesting about this is something I used to have to talk about with young SEALs, and that is being aggressive. Now, you wouldn't think that I would have to teach a young SEAL who joined the military to carry a machine gun. You wouldn't think that I had to teach him to be aggressive. But here's what I would see. We'd be out on a training mission, and there would be a building with a bunch of paintball gunfight going on inside this building. And I'd see a young SEAL officer, and they'd kind of start walking with their squad toward the building, and they'd start to slow down as they saw that paintball flying around. And they would actually come to a stop and just kind of freeze. And I would have to walk up behind them, and I would have to put my hand in their back, and I would have to propel them towards that problem. And I would say to them, that problem in that building is not going to go away. You have to go solve it. You have to be aggressive. That has got to be your default mode, is to take action. So often, people do not take action. They do not execute. And if you don't take action, things are not going to change. The good deals that you want in your business are not going to come your way. The problems that need to get solved are not going to solve themselves. You have to be default aggressive. You have to take action. Now, of course, this doesn't mean you're getting aggressive towards your people. If you do that, you ruin the first law of combat that I talked about, which is building relationships. So when I'm talking about being default aggressive, I'm not talking about being aggressive towards people. I'm talking about being aggressive towards solving problems and reaching your goals. That's where you need to get aggressive. Default aggressive. Now, the last thing I want to talk about with you is the idea of extreme ownership. And this is the title of the first book that I wrote about leadership. And this is an attitude. This is an attitude. This is a mindset where I am not going to blame anyone else, and I am not going to blame anything else, and I am not going to make any excuses when something goes wrong. Instead, I am going to take extreme ownership. Now, why did we name the book this? The reason that we named the book this is because when I worked with military leaders and military teams and civilian leaders and civilian teams, the winning teams and winning leaders were the ones that had this attitude. And I can tell you where it first became so obvious to me. It first became so obvious to me when I took over that training, that advanced training, and I got to see the contrast between good SEAL leaders and bad SEAL leaders. Because sometimes I would have a good SEAL leader coming through my training program, but sometimes I would have a bad leader coming through my SEAL training program. And the difference between them was so obvious. And the difference was their attitude of either taking ownership or not. And I can tell you exactly what it looked like. So when I had a bad SEAL leader coming through my training program, a bad SEAL leader, and I would take that bad SEAL leader and I would take him and his platoon and send them out on a training mission. And I would unleash some chaos on them and some mayhem on them. And they would start to fall apart. And it would be a total disaster, and it'd be mayhem, and it'd be chaos, and it would be a complete unmitigated mission failure. And I would bring that platoon back to base, and I would bring that bad SEAL leader to the front of the room, and I'd say, okay, Lieutenant, that was pathetic. What went wrong? And the bad SEAL leader would stand up and he'd say, well, first of all, assault team leader, you didn't bring enough people. You didn't bring a big enough team to clear that building. You didn't know how big that target building was. It took you forever to clear it. And that was the beginning of our problems. And then mobility commander in charge of the Humvees, in charge of picking us up, you didn't even know where to come pick us up. That's the only piece of information that you needed, and you didn't have it. Where to come pick us up. That's pathetic. And then, sniper team leader, you never told me where you and your team were. That caused all kinds of confusion out there. That's embarrassing. So if we're going to do any better as a platoon, you better figure out how to do your job. You better get a grip on reality, and you better square yourself away. And I would be listening to that debrief, and I would notice something, and I'm sure you all noticed something very peculiar about that debrief. What's peculiar about that debrief is none of it was my fault. No, none of it was my fault. It was his fault. It was his fault. It was his fault. And what happens when I point my finger at him, or I point my finger at him, or I point my finger at you, and I start to blame you for what went wrong? What's your natural reaction going to be? You're going to have the same natural reaction that everybody has. You're going to get defensive. And when people on the team get defensive, you know what they do? They point their finger at someone else, and then that person points their finger at someone else. And what you end up with is a team where everyone is pointing their fingers at each other. No one takes ownership of the problems, and therefore the problems don't get solved. And this team is never going to improve, and they're certainly not going to become exceptional. Now you compare that with a good SEAL leader. And I'd have a good SEAL leader coming through my training program, and I would send him and his platoon out on a training mission that would be just as hard, if not harder. And I would crush them just as bad, and they would fail horribly. And I would bring them back to base. And I'd bring the good SEAL leader to the front of the room, and I'd say, okay, Lieutenant, that was pathetic. What happened? And the good SEAL leader would stand up and say, well, okay, let me tell you what I saw from my perspective. First of all, assault team leader, I didn't give you enough people on your team. I should have sat down with you and made sure you knew how big the target building was, and I should have made sure I given you enough people for your team. Next mission, I'm going to sit down with you for 3 minutes right when we get the target package to make sure that you know how big the target is and you have enough people to handle it. That's what I'm going to do next time. And then mobility commander in charge of the Humvees. Somehow you came to my brief that I'm responsible for, and I failed as a leader to convey to you the one piece of information that you needed, and that was where to come pick us up. Next mission, when we get done with the brief, I'm going to sit down with you for 30 seconds. We're going to look at a map, and we're going to confirm 100% that you know where to come pick us up. And then finally, sniper team leader. I lost track of you, where you and your team were. I just didn't know where you were. And as a combat leader, that's my most important job, is to know where all my troops are. And I didn't know where you and your team are. So next time, what I'm going to do is we're going to plot some checkpoints and some waypoints on your whole route in, so that way I make sure I know where you and your team are at all times. So those are the things that I'm going to change so that we can do a better job next time. Now you can see that's a totally different debrief. It's a totally different debrief. And you might think that the team now points their finger back at me and they say, you're damn right, Jocko, this is all your fault. But they actually don't do that. They actually don't do that. Instead, the assault team leader says, hey, boss, you got a lot on your plate right now. I rounded down the number of people I thought I was going to need. I will not make that mistake again. You don't have to babysit me. And then the mobility commander in charge of the Humvees, he says, boss, there's only one piece of information that I needed, and that was where to pick you guys up, and I didn't have it. Not only did I not have it, no one on the team had it. That's embarrassing, and I will not let it happen again. I will make sure 100% we know exactly where to pick you up. My whole team will know exactly where to pick you up. This will not happen again. You don't have to babysit me. I got it. And then the sniper team leader says, boss, the reason you didn't know where I was is because I didn't know where I was. I got lost. My team got lost. Next time, I'm going to bring an extra GPS. I'm going to bring an extra map and compass. I will know exactly where I am, which means you will know exactly where I am. You don't have to worry about me. I got it. And now you can see what we have is we have a team where every person on the team is actually taking ownership of the problems, and therefore the problems get solved. And that team is going to improve every single operation that they do. And that is the type of team that will become exceptional. Now, we're going to get into some Q&A here in a minute. But before we get into the Q&A, I want to say something else. If you got some questions, there's a Q&A section, and you can post your questions in there. But let me say this. A lot of times when I talk to companies, I talk to businesses, I talk to elite teams, I talk to military units, elite military units, and sometimes I'll get done talking, and I'll just be conversing afterwards, and someone will come up to me and they'll say, "Hey, Jocko, I really like what you had to say today, and I really like what you said about extreme ownership, and it really helped my team was listening." Because if my team would just take ownership, we'd be good to go. And then I'll have someone else come up to me and say, "Hey, Jocko, I really like what you had to say today. I really like that idea of extreme ownership, and I really hope my boss was listening. Because if my boss would just take ownership, we'd be good to go." So I'm here to tell you, I'm not talking about your team, and I'm not talking about your boss. I'm talking about you. And if you start to step up and you start to take ownership, other people on your team will start to take ownership as well. And this will spread to almost everyone. And the reason I say it is spread to almost everyone, because I know there's someone sitting there right now and they're like, "Oh, yeah, Jocko's sitting here saying everyone's going to take ownership. Jocko doesn't know about Bill because Bill never wants to take ownership of anything." And you know what? That's actually correct. It's actually correct. In any organization, and I work with the biggest organizations in the world, the biggest companies in the world. I work with elite military units, elite police units, professional sports teams, SEAL platoons. It doesn't matter the organization. In every organization, there's going to be a small percentage of people that don't want to step up, they don't want to take ownership, and they don't want to lead. But this much I can promise you, and I can promise you this because I've seen it over and over and over again. And that is that the people that do step up and do take ownership and do want to lead, those people will steamroll the people that don't. And this will become the culture inside of your organization. And when that happens, your team will become unstoppable. But all of that starts with you. And with that, I'm going to get into the Q&A here. Looks like the first question is from Eddie. And Eddie says, "I would like to ask how Jocko builds a new system in his company." So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that the system that I'm trying to build is a required system, because it is going to help us with a process that we do repeatedly, right? We don't want to try and build systems for things that we do rarely. We don't really even want to invest a ton of time if it's something that we only do occasionally. But if there is something that we do on a regular basis, or something that we requires a very distinct process, even though we might not do it that often, I will put a system in place. And the way I will do that is start at the ground level. Who actually does that job? Who actually goes through the process on a regular basis that I can bring in to help develop that system? And then once I have that system developed with the people that actually know the system the best, then we will publish the way we are going to do it in an open-minded and flexible way. And the reason I have to add that last little part is no one, no person I've ever worked with has been able to look at a problem or look at a process and take that problem or process and in a first attempt give a complete solution. That doesn't happen. You're going to miss something. We're all miss something. So what I would tell the team is like, okay, guys, we got a new process for prepping our Humvees. Here's the checklist. Here's how we're going to do it. This is the first draft. I'm going to need feedback, and we're going to need feedback to improve this thing. So then you start to run that process of checking the Humvees, and someone goes, hey, right now you got us replacing the windshield fluid before we're checking the oil, and that doesn't make any sense because now we got oil on our hands and when we're supposed to be looking at the windscreen, and we're okay, cool, let's flip that around. And you get feedback and you hone that process and you make it better, you make it more efficient. And then once we have a very solid process, then I'll kind of lock it down as much as we can and disseminate it to the troops so they all understand how to make something happen. So that, Eddie, is how we would build a system inside the organization. Next question is from Amber. How can I figure out how I can better lead my team, especially when I am feeling burnt out? So there's quite a few things that could be going on here, Amber. The first thing we have to address is, why are you feeling burnt out? There's a bunch of reasons why people can feel burnt out. Sometimes they don't feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, right? And if you're feeling like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, well, then what are we striving for? Well, we're just going to work and work some more and work some more, and that can make people feel burnt out. Sometimes it's the stress that makes people feel burnt out. Sometimes you're really accomplishing things, but the stress is so much that it makes us feel burnt out. Sometimes we're not getting where we wanted to go. And so that's making, so there's a bunch of reasons why we as individuals can feel burnt out. And when we're in a leadership position, that can be the simple fact of being in a leadership position, the pressure that we have for delivering the job, for taking care of the team. We got payroll, we've got HR issues that are going on. We got all kinds of stress, and all of those things combined together can definitely make us feel burnt out. And then how that impacts us as leaders is we end up with an attitude, a negative attitude that's going to spread to the rest of the team. So one thing that there's a couple things to think about. Number one, if someone is getting burnt out, including yourself, Amber, you have to figure out a way to get out of that environment, that stressful environment, for a short period of time. This is something that happens in combat, something that happens in business, it's something that happens in sports. It happens everywhere. Everyone's got a limit. Everyone's got a limit of the amount of physical stress, the amount of mental stress that they can endure. And what we have to be careful of, it's like driving a vehicle. If you're driving down the road in a vehicle and the check engine light comes on, and the check engine lights come on, and you pull off, or you take it to the service station and you get the engine checked out and they do whatever they got to do, and you get back on the road, check engine lights off.